Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you find it most convenient to listen to the Bonfire. I, as always, am Alan the Pole with the goal, and that goal has already been ruined since Poland have been eliminated from the Euros 2024, so I'm sad. I'm always joined by my lovely, jubbly co-host, DJ.
Let's just invade Poland.
Okay, and Tim.
How'd that work out for the last people that tried that?
Oh no, I mean let's invade it with chocolate.
I mean that could
Interesting strategy.
We will win the polls with chocolate.
Anyways, unlike Poland, the U.S. M&T are still undefeated at the Euros. They, however, are not playing in the Euros, nor have they ever. They are playing in Copa America, and you lucky listeners that are living in the future get to know how their match against Bolivia turned out. We do not. That match has not yet happened. Also happening right now, as we're recording, is the final match of Switzerland's group stage in the Euros, so we also don't know how that turns out. Lots of things that we don't know. But one thing that we do know
is the Fire U15s are MLS next champions. They literally just won 3-1 against the Galaxy, so the Fire do have a championship winning side as of right now.
Very good for the youngins.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge deal. It's the U15. It's the youngest age group that MLS Next formally has competition for. So in a way, it's like the beginning of the pipeline for when players get serious in the academy, and the Fire have a number of skilled players that I think could ultimately be major impactors in MLS and possibly beyond. Obviously, you don't want to oversell 14-year-olds, but it's the same age group that Kevin Sullivan in Philadelphia and eventually of Manchester City is in. There is no other U.S. prospect in the same category as him, but probably the second prospect behind him is the Fire U15's Robert Jardine, who was active in the competition, looked good. Again, like he's also playing against other 14-year-olds. Like there's a long road before he becomes a professional, but so far things are looking really good for that age group.
I mean, hey, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So you got to start somewhere. And right now, a really good start. So good on. Like we did mention, Switzerland versus Germany is going on right now. The Swiss are actually leading 1-0. It's about halftime. Now, Shaqiri is on the bench as of right now. Maybe as the episode goes on, he will get subbed on. We know he didn't get featured in the first game, but in the second game, he did start and he scored a really nice goal that, prompted the internet just to be reminded that Shaqiri does indeed exist. And he's basically the Memo Ochoa of like the Euros. He always shows up when it comes to tournaments, based on his scoring. He's already scored more goals this calendar year for Switzerland than he has for the Fire.
Shaqiri is a national team player, and that is very obvious.
Yeah, I think also just a tournament player. Like he reliably has had a couple of games like that every year. It's just he doesn't do it game in and game out. And I think that the sort of like somewhat simpler tactics of tournament football and national team football sort of like suit him. Now, obviously I think that there's questions about what that means about his future, but for the time being, he remains a Fire player, and he is the first current MLS player to score in Euros, and actually the first current player from any team in North or South America to score in Euros. So that's, I guess it shows, right. It shows that the league is starting to change, getting more in prime European talent. Obviously it sort of helps that Switzerland is a smaller nation. And so a lot of their core are still like guys that are around his age, like Granit Xhaka, but still take what you can get.
It's also worth noting that a former Fire player too in Przemysław Frankowski played for Poland.
That is true.
Started.
I think that means there's now 2 of them, probably more than any other club in MLS. That's Euro players.
Yeah, and then I know there's Bartosz Ślisz, who plays for, I think, DC, that also featured for Poland. So there's definitely some MLS influence, whether it is, current as in Shaqiri as well as former from there. So When it comes to Shaqiri, he recently had some comments on Turkey. He was quoted to say, "I love Turkey. There are beautiful clubs and incredible fans in Turkey. Let's see what happens in the future." So is it possible that we will be seeing a move to Turkey? It's already been known that he wants to go back to Europe, but is it going to be in Turkey?
It's worth mentioning a few years ago, there were reports out of Turkey that he was being targeted. It sounded more like just an agent saying, hey, you should go after him. But I think it was Besiktas that was the one that was going after him. So that is worth noting too.
Yeah, and I will say that Türkiye is a country that his agent has very much been targeting as he looks to his future. Frank Klopas was asked about it. Well, I asked him about it after the Orlando match, and he did say basically that his future is up for grabs. Now, a player with less than 6 months left in his contract is allowed to talk to other teams and have his agent speak to other teams directly. Obviously, any move that happens in the summer window before that would have to happen with the Fire's consent. They would be willing to let Shaqiri go without a transfer fee. Obviously, Shaqiri would have to take a pay cut. Now, the pay cut he'd have to take for some of the bigger clubs in Turkey would probably be less than what he'd have to take to make it to a club in Switzerland. So whether he would be willing to exchange like length of term for lower pay and move this summer, I think is up for grabs and something to keep an eye on.
If Shaqiri gets transferred, they still have a buyout this summer in case they need to buy someone else outright.
So that's not official. So right now, the team MLS clubs only have one buyout. There was reporting that the league would like to do a second buyout this summer, along with some other changes, like giving every team access to all 3 U22 slots, giving them an option for, taking 2 DPs, 4 U22s, and some additional allocation money. Those changes have not been officially announced. And what I've been told is that one of the holdups is that the second buyout specifically has to be approved by the MLS Players Association. Obviously, a buyout, the player gets the money, but then they're out of a job. And so that is something the Players Association is concerned about. And it's kind of been a sticking point. Now, there hasn't been a breakthrough in that announced. If it's announced, it would have to happen soon. The MLS transfer window opens in July, but teams have to make plans for their summer transfers, based on what they have available. Like, you don't just call a guy up the day the window opens and says, hey, you want to play for us? Like, you have to be talking now, and realistically, conversations have been going on for months. So whether or not that happens, I think is to be determined. But as it stands, the Fire have used the one buyout that has been announced this season. Now, that does also give them leverage if talking to Shaqiri and his agent about him moving on, saying like, look, we can't buy you out. You're going to have to get a pay cut. You can get a pay cut now, or you can get a pay cut in October. We're willing to let you go on a free. Why don't you just move on and start the next step of your adventure? Otherwise, we're happy to just like have you, sit around on the bench or something like that. Like that, it does give the Fire some leverage. But obviously, it's never ideal to have a player somewhere they don't want to be.
Amen. I say to that. All right. One last piece of news before we get into the review of the last game. It's a bit on a sad note. Paul Cadwell, who is the Senior Vice President, Community Programs, Engagement, and Facilities person, he was recently cited for helping make the new training facility happen with, full engagement from the neighborhood, from the team. He has many roles with the team over the years. His brother-in-law recently died in a tragic accident, and Paul and his wife are now the guardians of their teenage daughter. There's a GoFundMe. We're gonna share that out from the MIR97 Pods account to support the Cadwell family. So please consider supporting if you can. Paul's been crucial. He's been a crucial part of the Fire family literally since day one. So,
yeah, for those of you that don't know Paul personally, he was initially brought in to run the academy. The Fire wanted to be the only club in MLS that actually ran their own academy. Then the front office was said, you can't do that. He was given a job literally kind of selling tickets, and he's had basically every role you can imagine with the club since. And he's just been an absolute bedrock of the Fire community. He's he's been active as sort of like he supervised Leslie, the supporter liaison, in her previous role. He's been the sort of like point person for supporter liaisons as they've been working to fill that position again. So a lot of fans and supporters know him personally. And he's really advocated a lot for what's in the interests of I think the fans. And again, it just my hearts really go out to Paul and his family.
Amen. All right. Now it's time to talk about the review of the previous game in Orlando. So, final score, Orlando 4, Fire 2. We scored multiple goals and unfortunately didn't get the result for the first time this season, falling 4-2 against Orlando. This is apparently the second season in a row where the Fire go into Orlando with 2 wins and then come out with a loss. We're now bottom of the Eastern for the first time this season, but we still are only 3 points out of a playoff spot somehow.
So that's just wild. Like, that is just absolutely wild.
That is just incroyable. So
that's just
a little
MLS.
Honestly, that is just one way of saying it. So just a little quick rundown of the goals. Literally 3rd minute, Facundo Torres just ran into the right side of the box and launched an absolute missile into the corner. I mean, it could possibly be a goal of the week. To start early once again for our opponents, as it's sort of been in the past few games, as we've seen that. Misery just continued to stack upon that. Well, I mean, the Fire did have some chances, but they didn't really do anything with that. And then in the 18th minute, Alan Aragoni and Arnold Suke pulled down Angulo to make it a penalty. And Muriel just dispatches it fairly easy to the right side to make it 2-0. And then said player who was fouled, Angulo, in the literally 29th, 30th minute, was unmarked as the ball was just bouncing around. It seemed Suke just lost him. He just easily tapped it in to make it 3-0, all before the half-hour mark. And that is also how the half ended. But we did see some fight back from the Fire, especially in the second half when we saw a Marin Haile Selassie penalty. There was a handball in the action there. It was kind of hard to see in the broadcast. Essentially, one of the which player was it, Tim? I'm pretty sure you know.
Geez, off the top of my head, I believe it was Schlegel, whose arm was kind of like on. It felt like the whole thing sort of like happened on the ground, but his arm did did change the direction of the ball. It was in the box. Like it's the right call. It's not the most like flagrant, like this guy is trying to play volleyball handball offense that you'll see, but I mean, it certainly was a handball offense.
Yeah, it's almost as if he was playing goalkeeper, but he's not goalkeeper. So Marin Haile Selassie dispatches it to make it 3-1. So that was that. Unfortunately, Facundo Torres in the 60th minute does what he does again. And this time it was from outside the box. Just once again, unmarked, left foot launches it into that same corner to make it 4-1. That was sort of when I was like, okay, come on.
And it was just such a confident goal from Facu Torres. Yeah. He really hasn't had a good season too. He manned his way centrally from a position wide, and it was just like, yeah, I'm just going to take this shot.
Yep. But some good news, though, at least for a certain player, and that is Hugo Kuipers. His run of goals and just goal contributions continue to work, as what essentially happened was Fabi Herbers crosses in from the left side. There was a mishap between the two defending Orlando players. Ball lands right in front of Hugo Kuipers, who just slides. Ball lands in the back of the net to make it 4-2. The Fire did try and heavily possess the ball since that goal in order to make some sort of comeback happen, and unfortunately, it just didn't happen.
Yeah. Overall, I mean, look, the Fire, if you divide a match into thirds, which is something that some coaches do, the Fire lost the first third of the match, and then they won the other 2/3. They control possession from about the 30th minute onwards, which Obviously, when Orlando was up 3-0, like you let the other team have the ball, but they really did have the better chances during that stretch. They outshot Orlando by 2-1. They had more, like twice as many shots on target. But they just, you can't put yourself in a 3-goal hole in the first 30 minutes and expect to win a soccer game, right? Like this team has battled back for pretty much every result they've got, but 3 goals is just, that is a deep hole.
Yeah, and they put up that fight, especially in the second half, both from the penalty for Marin Haile Selassie as well as the goal from Hugo Kuipers. Once again, just right position at the right time. We did see other moments like you mentioned, in the beginning of like that second third. We did see Guti have some shots that just hit the post as well. Essentially, we took a step back defensively because I love talking about my steps and strides, and I feel like defensively those steps have gone backwards, while offensively they just haven't been. They were moving, but they just haven't. Like you said, it's hard to do anything when you put yourself into that 3-hole goal. Honestly, it's possible, but the Fire are just not that kind of team yet.
Well, and realistically, like any team putting yourself in a 3-goal hole in 30 minutes, like you're not going to be feeling good about yourselves. And the Fire did after those 30 minutes, they won. They scored 2 goals. Orlando scored 1. They controlled possession. Like it doesn't matter. Like that's just a ton of goals.
True.
And you're right. Like Brian Gutierrez, you're right to call him out. I think this more than any other game. Obviously, he didn't wind up getting a goal, but he played like a leader on the pitch for the Fire in this game. You mentioned that shot, 24th minute off the post. I mean, he had the goalkeeper beat. Like it could have been a goal. If it had been a goal at that point, the Fire would have been down 2-1, and it possibly would have been a different ball game than the one that we experienced. He had a number of other shots. He couldn't ultimately get one in, but he was shooting from distance. He was shooting from close in. Like it felt like he was trying to carry the team. And obviously, the result wasn't there this match, but I think that if you're a Fire fan, if you're the Fire front office with the new deal that he's got, paying him like a leader on the pitch, you want him to grow into that leader, but it's not something that we've really seen. And this is the first time since Shaqiri's gone that he really had a performance where it felt like he wasn't wearing the armband. Fabian Herbers was wearing the armband, but it felt like he was one of the leaders on the pitch for the Fire. And that's really what you want to see going forward.
Yep. Amen. I say to that.
I think it's also worth saying too with Guti, it's going to be the growing pain, because it's going to be a lot of growing pain because the dude's just now turned 21. It's going to take time for him to actually become the leader that he needs to be.
Yeah, and an open question with any guy that young is like when these bumps on the road happen, where like he did a lot of things right? Like he wasn't at fault for any of the goals against. He had shots. He really could have had a goal with just like, it's like a whim of the gods sort of thing that he didn't. But does he say, all right, I need to do that again, or I need to do better again, or I did everything right? And it's just, that happens sometimes and I need to just get back to doing that again. Or does he take it on the chest and does he say, oh man, like I did everything right and we still didn't win. And so now like, what's the point? Right. Like, and that's always a question that for guys as they're, it's the mental side of things. And as Frank Klopas pointed out, and as you did, DJ, like he is young, like he's just 21. He's played a ton of minutes this year. There's also a physical side of things as well, where, he isn't like Hugo Kuipers, where he's played season in, season out for years and years and years, right? Like it's taking, like the game takes a toll on your body, and it's still something that he's adapting to.
I think it's also very good that he knows Gaga, because if you guys remember back in 2022, we had this exact same conversation, but worse with him because of how bad Selena had been doing. Because there was that stretch where there were calls to just straight bench the dude because he was just not performing.
So Guti was benched earlier in the season, if you remember. There were matches that he didn't start. Frank Klopas was asked about that at the time, and he basically pointed out, like what you said, DJ, like he is young, and he said there's things you see in training. He seemed to make it seem like it was a combination of physical things, but an attitude thing as well, and some of the work that he maybe wasn't putting in. Now, I will say, like, at that point, I think that his role was not nearly as clearly defined because Shaqiri was there. So I think that if you're Goody, there's a certain amount of like, no matter what I do, it doesn't really matter because Shaqiri is still going to start over me. He's going to get the job that I think I can do better. So what's the point? And I think it's one of those things where, like, again, like, you give him the keys to the car and it's obvious then what's going on, right? Like it's like, it's his role and that's what you wanted to see.
Amen.
Absolutely.
All right. So, unfortunately, I just also now remember that the Kutsia shirt tucked in streak has been broken. So it's now 2-0-1, which is a shame. And
there's a wrinkle to that, though.
What is it?
Well, I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the Fire did have a tactical shift to a four-man back line for the first time in the past 4 matches. So maybe the rule is it needs to be a Kusi. By the time that Kusi was brought on, the team was already playing at a sort of like closer to like a, I don't know, it's like a 4-2-3-1-ish at points, like a 4-4-2 at others. But regardless, it was a 4-person backline. So maybe it needs to be 3 center backs, Kutsi on, shirt tucked, and that's what the team needs to win.
Well, next time you talk to Frank Klopas at a conference, you could definitely let him know that and those ideas.
Yeah, I'm sure that he really wants to hear my ideas about the team. By the way, it's when other reporters have asked him questions about, like, for example, like after both Gutman and Gasper were injured, asked about like who would be starting at left back, and they just, threw out names of players that have started at left back in previous clubs, including Kellen Acosta. Frank Klopas is clearly having none of it, so he does not like comments from the peanut gallery, which I can't blame him for. Frank Klopas has forgotten more about soccer from breakfast till now than I think I'll ever know. So that's fair on his part.
I mean, hey, all the glory to him. So essentially, we sort of talked about this. What do we take from the Fire's performance? Like, sort of, how did Orlando? Because we mentioned that Orlando was in sort of a stink beforehand as well, and they sort of were able to go in and go crazy at times. Like you mentioned, Facundo Torres was having trouble and he just bombed 2 excellent goals against us. So sort of, what was the change? Because I know one thing that the commentators were saying, like, oh, Chicago couldn't handle the heat and humidity, as if we weren't having our own humidity and 90-degree plus weather right now this week.
I will say your humidity up there is not like Florida. It is not.
It still exists, though.
Doesn't matter. You're comparing the Amazon to Mexico.
All right, so is it the humidity that threw off the Fire?
Oh, no.
I did actually. I asked Fabian Herbers about that after the match, and he said, I mean, basically based on Florida standards, he said it wasn't nearly as bad as it has been when the team had gone down there. It was hot, he said, at kickoff, but after a while, it sort of adapted. Now, obviously, when it's that hot, like, the thing that you want to do is basically what Orlando did, right? Like, you want to get ahead, and then you can let the other team kick the ball around as much as they want, and you can, like, lay back and save a little bit of your energy, whereas the Fire had to really take the game to Orlando.
Yeah, that's sort of weird because we can, in the last few episodes where we talked, especially in the Galaxy and the Toronto game, we talked about how the Fire were less possession based and how whenever the Fire would do anything, they would do it usually off the ball, let the opponents handle the ball, and then sort of like grab and go in it. And I think that's sort of essentially what Orlando did, is that they just jumped out of the gates, did what they needed to do early in their house, in their territory, and then they let the Fire play with that possession, which is what could have led to the switch back to 4 defenders. And I honestly think that this just also wasn't the best game for the people out back. So,
and the switch back to 4 defenders. Like, let's be clear about like what exactly happened. Like, the Fire took off Alan Aragoni, who maybe was lucky not to get a yellow card on the play that caused a penalty that put Orlando up 2-0 so early. Took off Alan Aragoni and brought on Chris Mueller, who's a former Orlando City player. Like, obviously, like, they, maybe a little bit of a chip on his shoulder playing against his former club. And so like the decision to take off a defending player and put in an attacking player, I think is sort of like understandable and justified in that context.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that you're exactly right, though. And I asked Frank Klopas about the team controlling possession, and he said basically he discounted it because, as you said, Orlando were controlling the terms. Like they were up 3 goals. They didn't need the ball. They needed to make the Fire work with the ball. And it's like, here, go ahead, have it. Like, do whatever you want. We're up a bunch. We can absorb it and we'll counterattack. And that worked out pretty well for them. So I think that does limit, I think, what you take from this match, right? Like, because the Fire's game plan was like ripped to shreds in the first half hour. And they played well for the hour after that. But like, again, like it's against the team that was up a bunch of goals and like the game plan was ripped to shreds. So like, it shows something that they've got heart, but like in the end, Orlando wasn't going to lose this one after going up by that much.
Yeah.
Defensively, once you concede early in the match, it is almost impossible sometimes. And I feel like that was what this match was Orlando basically said, we scored, go at them again. We scored, go at them again. Just get that consolation, just get that finisher. And when you're going against a team that's trying to score just for the sake of it versus the team that's trying to score because they have to, the game changes. When I was in high school, that's one thing my high school soccer coach said was, if you play for the fun of it, you're going to play well. If you play because you have to win, you're going to struggle sometimes. That's what this was.
Yeah, and what you mentioned of like the hitting it from the very get-go, which is sort of what Orlando did the first game at Soldier Field, same thing what the Galaxy did. And one was a draw, and the other one was a win because the Fire did manage to just hold on to their system. And I think because of the quick, rapid succession of the goals from Orlando and them just controlling their game plan in comparison to what we had was just what prevented the Fire from making some form of comeback, I guess.
Yeah, like the Fire won the XG battle, but again, like a lot of that came when the Fire were already down by actual goals. Like I will say, like a different goalkeeper, or a goalkeeper that's not on his game as much as Orlando's backup goalkeeper was, this result may turn up differently just because he was getting peppered with shots and a lot of them were good chances. Like that shot that hit the post for Guti, like, this game could have ended differently. Like it's not great that it's a loss. And like, I know that there have been a ton of them but honestly, it just seems like one of those things where like the takeaway is like, don't let Facundo Torres score against you in the 4th minute. That's the lesson to learn. And if you don't do that, I think it's a different match.
Yep.
Give Facundo Torres an inch, he will take that inch and then some.
Yeah, and he's been underperforming. Like he started playing better, but like hadn't been getting the results. So like it sort of felt like it was coming for him. Like he was kind of hanging around at the bottom of the Golden Boot race for a little bit last year, and this year he's got, I think that coming into the match he had as many goals as Brian Gutierrez. So like, things had not been going according to plan.
Yep.
The last thing I kind of want to note, and I didn't get a chance to ask Lopez about this, but I thought it was interesting that Arnaud Souquet got the start for the second match in a row. Obviously, the team got a good result against Toronto with this same starting 11, but Rafa Chihos wasn't available for that match. He wasn't able to get it to Toronto from his green card appointment. He was available for this match. He was on the bench. I would have expected him to start just because, former team captain, one of the most solid center backs the Fire I've really seen in the past few seasons. Had a dip in form beginning of the year, had been playing better. So I'm surprised he didn't get the start. And I think that Souquet was somewhat responsible for at least 2 of Orlando's goals. So I do sort of question that.
Yeah.
That decision.
At least 2. I think of the penalty and then the Angulo goal.
Well,
3-0.
Well, I guess that's 3 because the opening goal as well. What happens is, Arnaud Souquet sort of misses his mark, and then Degerden Thorson is able to get the ball, make a pass to Facu Torres, who just like nails the shot. Like he hits the shot perfectly, and if it was anything less than perfect, there's a good chance that Brady stops it. But it's just one of those things.
Which is interesting because me and Alex Campbell on one of the recent CH Go Fire podcasts talked about like mid-season superlatives and our sort of player to choose for most improved was Arnaud Souquet. So maybe there's still some improvement to go.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. Well, let's move to the complete other end of the country, and that is Seattle, where the Fire, I'm pretty sure this is the last of the away stint before they come back to Soldier Field, if I'm correct.
When is the game against? I believe there's a match. When's the Earthquakes? Is that following?
No, they come back to face Philadelphia, then they go to San Jose, then they come back for New York, then they go to Cincinnati, and then Miami.
All right, so yeah, one more away game before they come back to Soldier Field against the Seattle Sounders, who currently have a record of 6 wins, 7 draws, and 7 losses, which puts them right outside the Western Conference playoff spot. But technically, they're on the same points of Vancouver. They're just, I guess, goal differential is what separates them. The previous result between the two teams was actually a Fire victory in Soldier Field in July 2 years ago, where Rafa Chihos got the goal in the 23rd minute. And the previous match in Seattle, well, that was all the way back March 1st of 2020. It was the season opener for the Fire. It was the very first game under Heights, Wiki, like the whole men's sweat. Like this was the start of this whole I guess, new era of Chicago Fire Football Club. This is technically the first game where they were known as Chicago Fire FC.
This was the game that was supposed to lead up to Soldier Field and be like the grand opening of the Fire back to Chicago. And then, yeah.
Well, we did have one more away game. That was the 1-1 draw against New England. And then it was supposed to be the first game at Soldier Field. And then Kovisha happened. So, yeah.
Yeah, but that's New England. Nobody cares about New England.
But at that point, like, Seattle really were the toast of the league, right? Like, they...
Truly,
like,
yeah.
And so I think that match, for the Fire to come out and play as well as they did, it really felt like it could have been a new era for the Fire at that point. Like, obviously, we sort of know how that turns out, but Jordan Morris was a second half substitution in that match, and before that it felt like it was the Fire's to win. They scored early in the second half, and then Jordan Morris just went and decided to destroy the Fire. He willed a brace into existence and gave them the 2-1 win. But like still, like again, against the class of the league, you're sort of like, all right, well, I guess that happens, but the Fire, if you're a Fire fan, I think you looked at that match and like, that looked good. We can improve on that, right? Like there's a lot there to like.
And there were also a lot of unlucky moments. I think Beric had 2 goals called for offside. So, he theoretically could have had a hat trick.
Speaking about Jordan Morris braces.
Yep. Their last game, the Sounders faced off against Dallas, winning 3-2 with a Jordan Morris late brace in the 88th and the 90 plus 4th minute, 90th minute plus 4 of extra time to give them the win. And as we mentioned, Jordan Morris was the guy that gave the brace against the Fire in Seattle at the start of the 2020 season. So, wow, that's funny.
Yeah. And like, like the match against the Fire, it sort of like felt like it was like Dallas were actually up 2-0 in the second half. Like it felt like it was their match to lose, and then they found a way to lose it, which is sort of the way their season's been going. Sorry, other team that competes for the Brimstone Cup.
That just describes Dallas's MLS history, to be fair.
Yeah, and it did sort of feel like there was a controversial, the second Morris goal. There was a question of whether or not there was a handball on a Seattle player in the build up to that goal. It was reviewed. Obviously, the VAR determined that the goal should stand. It looked to me like a handball. The Seattle player said it was off his shoulder, but of course he would say that, right? Like, so it almost felt like if you wanted to put a tinfoil hat on and say like plot armor goal for Seattle getting their season back on track, that's sort of what it was. Because it now, like you pointed out, Alan, like they're knocking on the door of the playoffs, and beginning of the season they couldn't buy a win. Like they kind of sort of had one win in their first 10 matches. Their third match of the season against the Philadelphia Union was postponed or like interrupted partway through, and then when it was resumed, they ended up winning that one. But if you were coming into game 10 of the Sounders season, they only had one win on the year, alongside just 3 draws. Like it looked like things were sort of like starting to fall a little bit apart in Seattle, and since then they've really turned it on, and are now knocking on the door of the playoffs.
Yeah, so they've somehow were able to slowly set their ship on the right path. They're still in the Open Cup, one of the MLS teams allowed to participate in the Open Cup instead of their second team. They're still in that competition, so they still have a bit to play against. They play against Sacramento in a few weeks, so we'll see how that goes. Of course, we mentioned Jordan Morris. You, of course, have other Seattle notables as like Raul Diaz. You have Christian Roldan, Stefan Fry, Albert Rusnak. So, those players always to look out for when it comes to Seattle.
Yeah, it's still a very talented squad. Obviously, like Nico Lodeiro became an Orlando City player, so we just saw him last Saturday. He'd been a core part of that franchise. They let him move on. So there has been a little bit of squad renewal. I think that until recently, Sounders fans would have told you it'd have been a downgrade, but I think now with things looking up, maybe that verdict changes a little bit. So it's going to be an interesting match. It's worth saying the Fire have played Seattle twice since that match pre-COVID. Once in the MLS's back tournament, which they won, and then once at home.
I remember that one.
They also won. So, the Fire have been getting results against Seattle. Now, I mean, DJ, you can talk about how difficult it's been for the team to get results in Cascadia.
Nah, listen to that.
But, yeah, so for those that might have missed it a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned this. The Fire historically have not been good in Cascadia until the last 2 seasons where they finally won against Vancouver. They won at Portland. They can now potentially complete the triple streak and beat Seattle in Cascadia. And if they do that, that will be pretty good historically. I don't know if they unlock a tactical nuke. Hopefully they do. And they can fire it at the Revolution. But still, that would actually be really interesting to see, because for reference, Portland and Seattle have been, just since they got in the league, they've been the top of the league. They've been 2 of the best teams in the entire MLS. So the fact that the Fire are now at a point where they've beaten all 3 of them, that'd just be awesome.
Yeah, because the Fire have never beat the Sounders at home, correct, DJ?
Nope, they have never won. They've gotten draws before. I want to say they've gotten like 2 or 3 draws, but historically, when the Fire used to go over to Seattle often, it was in like the Freddie Montero days, and that was when you did not win at Seattle. If you went to Seattle, you were prepared to take a loss, and if you came away with a draw, you were happy.
Yeah, it's always been a difficult place to play. Obviously, great crowd. Very well attended team. You are playing on turf, which I know that you talk to players and they'll say different things about it depending on the context and stuff like that. But between those factors and just the talent of Seattle, it's never been an easy place to play. And this looked like a weakened Seattle squad a few weeks ago, and then really the month of May and June is theirs. They've only they've only had one loss in their past 7 matches.
Oh,
They've been in good form. So, now, I mean, that loss did come to Sporting Kansas City, who have been having also a pretty difficult season. So it's not like they're invincible, but I mean, they've been kind of turning it on.
yeah. All right. Score predictions, gentlemen.
I'm gonna say the Fire somehow manage a 3-2 victory, and I'm gonna say it's extremely close, and it's off of like a last-second goal.
So the table's turning, essentially.
Basically,
Okay, Mr. Tim.
The Brimstone Cup revenge. Right now, I guess I'm going to say a 2-2 draw. The Fire haven't had multi-goal draws other than the season opener. I feel like it just sort of feels like where things may be at. And then I think that sets up a question of how the Fire, play from here on out. If they do get a win, I mean, it could be huge. Like, they're still likely going to be chasing the playoffs because when you're in 15th, like, you need every team above you to drop points to get into that spot, even if you're only 3 points out. But I mean, man, that could be huge.
True. I like trying to think of a bunch of different things all in together based on what we've seen, what we know.
pancake versus waffle.
Essentially, that's essentially what I'm thinking right here. Could I go for pancakes or could I go for waffles? Could I go for like the potato pancakes that we make in Poland? All right, I'm completely twisting up the subject. I'm gonna go.
We've broken Alan.
I've been broken since I finished university and long before that. So I'm gonna go for a 2-1 win for the Fire. I'm still optimistic. And hopefully with the return of like Rafa and maybe some little changes in the squad and mentality, something can be flipped so we can continue on the good stride and just consider what happened in Orlando just to be a minute setback, because that's the optimist I am.
It is worth noting, after this game, the Fire only have 14 games left in the season and 5 games until the league's cup break, which will last for over a month. So they've got 5 games in the month of July, and after that they have, 9 games for the entire season?
Plus League's Cup, which does put miles on, right? So, but you're right. Like, if your plan is like if the Fire are going to turn their season around, like they're running out of runway. Yeah, they're very much running out of runway.
The time is nigh. All right, ladies and germs and they, thems of the Fire, thank you as always for listening to The Bonfire. If you're not already, then you are just way too late. Just do it now. We'll be checking everyone's homework at the end of the season to make sure that you are following MIR97 as well as MIR97 Pods. That's where we'll be putting up the GoFundMe for the Cadwell family as well, so please go support if you can, as well as Men in Red 97 on all social media platforms, Men in Red 97 on the website to read all the amazing articles and other things we have at Men in Red. So, for now until forever, come on you Men in Red.